Welcome, everybody. We're going to start a little bit early since the room's pretty full to allow for more question and answer at the end. I want to welcome you to the 2:10 session of day one of Drive. This is the sound room, and you are going to listen to Kevin MacDonell about the Analytic Investment. So a little bit about Kevin. He is the business analyst working in advancement services and external relations at Dalhousie University in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And he's been writing about predictive analytics for higher education and advancement since 2009 via his blog, cooldata.org. At Dalhousie, he carries out data mining and predictive modeling for advancement operations, as well as business intelligence functions, which include developing reports and dashboards to enhance performance management at the department, program, and individual levels. His previous employment included 2 years in communications, 5 years in prospect research, and 2 years in annual giving, particularly in the phonathon area. And he has presented on analytics subjects for conferences hosted by APRA Canada, APRA International, AFP, CAGP, and CASE. Kevin.
Thank you very much. Seems that everyone's talking about analytics and big data and so on, and it's very sexy. Data scientist is supposed to be the sexiest new occupation out there. We might ask Chuck about that. Finally, institutions and organizations are, making investments in analytics. They're finally becoming, taking the first steps or taking more steps to becoming data-driven. However, I feel that progress in analytics and reaching that goal is not inevitable. In fact, it's not even a goal. It's not a destination that somehow we get there and now we're a data-driven organization and that's where we stay. It's not like a baptism. It's something that needs to be invested in and encouraged over the long haul, because it is possible for an organization to actually slip backwards. So it's more of a journey than a destination. Excuse me. So why do we make investments in analytics? I think some of the reasons that, not just my institution, but others, they're not exactly the most sound or solid reasons. I think we do it because data and analytics, big data, these are buzzwords. We do it because we know other institutions are making investments in that area. We don't want to get left behind. We want to, we may have an innovation agenda. This looks like innovation, so let's do it. But I'm not sure that, that's great, that's wonderful. That's how we operate, I think. But I'm not really sure that that's going to make analytics sustainable in the long term. At some point, data is always going to be important, but I think some of the hype around data eventually is going to subside. I think it's just natural. So what we need to have in place are some more solid reasons for actually making the investment or maintaining the investment. So today I'm just going to put some of my ideas out there. And if you read my blog post this morning, I have more questions than answers, because making those determinations about is our investment paying off is something that we struggle with, and we're not really there. Speaking of struggling, I definitely struggled with this topic. For one thing, I consider myself part of the analytical investment at Dalhousie, so of course I think I'm worth it, right? And a lot of you probably feel like you're part of the investment that your institution is making in analytics. So, and the reason you're here, you already know that analytics is something that we need to invest in. I'd be surprised if you're here and you think that if you have a lot of doubts about that. So one of my struggles was, how do I make this talk relevant to you? Because you don't necessarily need a lot of convincing. So, well, the other thing that I struggled with is that it's not really part of my job yet. I work on interesting problems and cool things. And the fact that they actually happen to have a connection to our business needs is kind of gravy, okay? Really, what I'd prefer to be doing is just working on cool stuff. So I don't really think about in terms of stuff like ROI and things that I associate with more like accounting, say. That was supposed to be my last slide. That's me. And I'm wondering, am I worth it? Yes. Some of you, although you don't need convincing that an investment is worthwhile, you may need to be making the case to somebody who doesn't necessarily get it. And I think that you may currently be trying to make managers and directors and VPs understand analytics and the power of data. So you're really trying to make them understand your language to some degree. And I think that you'll have a lot more success in getting your stuff funded if you actually start to speak in their language. An example being this. Because they're concerned about concrete benefits. They're concerned about return on investment. They're concerned about some of the maybe what I might think of as a boring thing like ROI, but it's important. So that I'm going to explore what I'm talking about. First of all, what are we investing in? The term analytics, it's got all these sharp corners on it. It sounds like a very precise term, but it's not really. It's actually quite vague. Depending on who you're talking with, it can include all kinds of different things. My title is business analyst, so I actually got to define, it's a new position, I actually got to define what my job role is and what my function is. So analytics, what it is something I had to give a lot of thought to. And initially, about a year ago, when I was defining my job description, I had a very split kind of approach to it. On one side was the business intelligence, reporting, delivering the standard reports, and then there was the predictive analytics side, related but separate. Business intelligence looking backwards or looking at the present and simply reporting and describing it. Predictive analytics looking into the future, trying to model behavior, see who's most likely to do this or that, or run what-if scenarios, or do forecasting. One thing I didn't see was that one was a subset of the other. Then a while ago, I came across a really great article by Thomas Davenport. He wrote Competing on Analytics, which is very influential in the private sector. And I found this piece very useful because it really helped to refine some of the conceptual framework about what my job was about and what our work is about. And he specifically addresses the link between business intelligence and analytics. He writes that BI was originally about generating standard reports. And it's kind of evolved or morphed into a more general, vague term that sometimes even encapsulates advanced analytics, such as predictive analytics. The term analytics is more recent and associated with quantitative work. And the risk that Davenport saw was that these quantitative workers were at risk of being separated from the business side of things, that they were kind of hived off in the back and doing their predictive models, and yes, it was all very interesting, they were getting insights, but they weren't necessarily being fed back into the business, they weren't necessarily being deployed and learned from over time. So he saw this as leading to some dysfunction. When you have business intelligence and predictive analytics or analytics split from each other, he saw that there's a lot of risks involved in this. So I'm not actually going to read this slide to you, but I'll just leave it up for now. I don't know if Thomas Davenport actually invented the term business analytics. I suspect it actually goes back farther than his 2010 paper, but he posits a blended term which merges BI and PA. And I don't know if it's really a light bulb going on for you folks, but it certainly was for me, in that I suddenly began to see how these two things are supposed to be connected, how the two halves of my job actually fit together. I think just by default the two halves fit together because I know something about our database, I know something about our data, and I'm going to end up doing both things. I think the real key insight for me was that the way that business intelligence and analytics work together closes the loop. And it closes the loop for predictive analytics in three specific ways. First of all, when I'm creating a predictive model and I want to get people to use it, I'm facing a number of challenges. First of all, deployment. Just getting people to understand what on earth a set of predictive scores is meant to do and how they're supposed to apply it. I used to work in annual fund. I used to build my own predictive models for Phonathon, for the direct mail program, and I was, in a sense, the end user. There wasn't that gap between the predictive modeler and the end user. Well, now there is, because I work in advancement services. So I have to be in touch with annual giving all the time and say, what are you doing with that? Or are you successfully limiting the size of your mailing to the people who are most likely to give, and so on. And BI is going to help with that. Well, I'll show you some examples. Second challenge is figuring out how a predictive model is working. I need that feedback loop to figure out, well, that model was deployed 6 months ago or a week ago. How is it actually performing? Is it doing what it was intended to do? And the third challenge is taking the results of a predictive modeling exercise and feeding it back into the next iteration. I've certainly had a number of failed predictive models, and it's something you need to discover pretty quickly. So you want to know what's wrong with it and what can I learn, and feed it into the next iteration. So I just want to show you some practical examples about what I mean about closing the loop. And the first area I want to talk about is in deployment. This is I call it a mapping tool for prospect identification. I built it for the use of prospect researchers. And I don't have much in the way of results yet because this is like literally maybe 2 weeks old. This is just I took everyone in California, and I would do this for each state and province, geocoded their addresses. These are alumni and friends and parents. And throw them on a map, which has a layer of U.S. Census data, and it allows a prospect researcher to immediately throw out a whole bunch of dots that they know are not going to be of interest. Rightly or wrongly, at least it's a very first cut of the data, and it's highly visual. So this zooms in on San Francisco, and I hope that I've blanked out any confidential information, but you could see details in a tooltip about individual constituents. And there's also a link to Google Street View. So the prospect researcher, what do they want to know? They want to get a look at the person's house. So they can do that through the URL, which links directly from the constituents' coordinates. It's basically a report, and it allows the researcher to filter on a number of different factors, such as giving history, age. I have some rather crude capacity-related stuff in there, such as some data from Forbes magazine on house prices by zip, stuff like that. But what's really key here is that the results, the scores of my predictive model for major gift propensity are baked right in. So it's not just like this list in an Excel sheet, or I'm not sending them a score set, with IDs on one side and their percentile scores in another column, and let them figure it out. This actually allows them to select prospects with a slider. It's very hands-on and it's very visual. They can see clusters of individuals. Look, for example, my VP is in California. This is not coincidental right now, and they use this tool to identify people who live within a certain neighborhood of other visits that he already has set up. So that's closing the loop as far as deployment goes. I think I like to think that this kind of hands-on tool that you're putting in people's hands makes the act of working with predictive scores kind of fun. You know, it's, and I think the fun element is something that's kind of missing from a lot of people's work. But if you give them a tool that's actually, you know, visual and just fun, you know, they're going to use it. That's my hope anyway. This is another report, and this is on the evaluation side of things, and this report is not very pretty at all. That's because it's mainly for my own use. I build a model to predict likelihood of an alum to pick up the phone. We have a couple of challenges in Phone-a-thon. First of all, getting a pledge, but before that, they have to actually pick up the phone. So we have 7 or 8 years of call history data in the database behind our automated calling software, and that's all I need in order to build a predictive model. So what this allows me to do is tap into the call result data right from last night and see, well, how did each score level, they scored from 0 to 10, how did each score level respond, or what's their contact rate to date? So that, first of all, gives me instant feedback as to that the model is actually working. But I can also drill down and I can limit according to what segment I'm interested in, whether it's acquisition or renewal. And I can also segment out by, well, what about the folks that we've already tried 10 times already? If I limit on that, is this model still worth using? And at a certain point, maybe it's not, although it tends to be. So far, it's working out well. This is on the learning side of things. Again, this is a report that you know, no one in annual giving is going to see, because it's a they'll take one look at this and, you know, and I'm not going to just go into a huge amount of detail about it. I've actually written a blog post on the subject of heat maps, so if you want to look that up, you'll get a much better explanation than I can convey today. But essentially what I'm doing here is I'm taking 2 models. One is a logistic regression model and the other is a multiple linear regression model. So they're just slightly different. They were built with the same data, but they end up with different scores for people. So I want to know, well, which one actually works, but not only that, which one works for what cohort of alumni. So yeah, I don't know if I want to get into describing it, but on the left-hand side, you've got basically number of donors, and the darker the square, the more donors you've got in that square. So you think you've got one set of model scores on one axis, another set of model scores on the other axis, and the darker squares kind of reveal where most of them are falling. And the one in green is actually by dollars. So if I limit by age, for example, and I just want to look at the young alumni, I might notice that the dark spots move up or down. If you, like the sort of 45-degree angle line through it, that's where the scores are exactly the same. But if the dark squares move to one side or the other of that 45-degree angle, I know that one or the other model is actually outperforming. And I might use that to decide, well, maybe next time I don't want to build just one model. I might want to actually have one model for one age group and another model for a different age group. That's all I'm going to say about that. So that last one kind of looks like analytics, but it's really a report. So once again, it's closing the loop between BI and analytics. So that's all kind of been a very roundabout way of getting to my point, which is what exactly am I talking about when I say analytics, what we're trying to invest in. And I think it's clear from what I've discovered about the link between BI and PA is that there's no hard and fast line where you can draw it and say, yeah, that's just reporting, or this is actually, you know, analytics. I think it's a spectrum, but for now, for this, when I'm talking about investing, just consider that towards the right end of the spectrum is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about analytics, although I may not want to try to draw a very precise line about where that falls. From the point of view of investment, analytic activities are an add-on to everything that we do. I work in advancement services, and we are pretty much maxed out on delivering services to everyone else in our external relations department. the thing to remember is that analytics doesn't supersede or replace anything that we're doing currently. There may be opportunities for it to optimize some of what we do, but really it's going to involve more time, more cost. So it is a cost, although I'm reluctant to admit that. I think analytics, it saves us money, it makes us money. You know? But the doing of it means that something has to give. So I think that brings us to, if we're going to talk about, in the language of people who are going to be deciding whether to invest, we got to talk about return on investment. In theory, ROI, now this is the accounting part of the presentation, so ROI is a very simple calculation. It's nothing like multiple regression for sure. So, you know, you'd think that we'd be using it at Dalhousie, but I have to say, I don't hear a lot of disciplined conversations about ROI in my department. As a business analyst, I feel, you know, I feel like it should be a KPI that I'm constantly pushing out there. Yes, here's the ROI on your project. Here's the competing ROIs of a number of different options that we might want to choose from. Let's choose one with the highest ROI. But we don't actually. It doesn't mean that I don't hear the term a lot. I hear it a lot. But I think it's used in and I'm not picking on Dalhousie necessarily. I read it all the time. I hear it from people. Yeah, return on investment. It's just used, I find it's used in an anecdotal way. And really, I think we should have a new rule. You're not allowed to use the acronym ROI unless you're actually talking about real numbers. Because otherwise, it's just kind of another term that we use. Yeah, this should have a positive ROI. That sounds so impressive. When really all you're saying is, this investment has to make a return. Or, if we have a number of different projects that we have to decide which one we're going to invest on, we should choose the one that has the highest return. That's not rocket science. Unfortunately, when I was thinking about ROI for something as big as analytics, I immediately thought of all the problems in the way of doing so. I just didn't see how a simple definition of ROI could actually get at what the value of analytics is to an institution. In fact, I came up with 4 specific issues that I have with ROI. The first problem that I see with simple ROI is that it's kind of a catch-22. If you're an institution that's just beginning to think about making investments in getting smart about data-driven decision-making, you may not have a whole lot of depth on the analytical side of things. ROI seems like a simple calculation, but it's actually, there is no one right way to calculate ROI. And it's very difficult to know what costs and benefits to include or exclude. And especially if you're projecting into the future, if you haven't made investments in those skills before, maybe it's not something you're going to do a very good job at. Second problem I see is that sometimes when we talk about ROI, we're including a lot of costs that from our perspective are sunk costs. A lot of the articles I read about ROI in the private sector quote these massive dollar figures, you know, the campaign to re-elect President Obama, $100 million, the biggest analytics investment in any presidential campaign, and so on. It didn't really square with my experience of how I do analytics on a very small scale. And I think part of the reason is that these articles that I've been reading, they tend to include investments in infrastructure such as databases, data warehouses, time spent on data management solutions. And these, to a university, are sunk costs. And I don't think if we're going to be considering making investments, let's say in our external relations department, that we're going to be adding on the cost of our database. That's a sunk cost. Problem 3 is what I call the all or nothing fallacy. When you name something a fallacy, it automatically makes it more important sounding, so that's what I went for. This is kind of related to the idea that analytics is a single massive investment. we get dunked and all of a sudden we're now a data-driven institution. That's not how I see it. I see institutions evolving towards becoming data-driven. It goes from project to project. It goes from employee to employee, from one specific realm to the next, and eventually an institution gets closer to the goal. So to me, it's spending moderate amounts of dollars over a protracted period of time. To me, it doesn't seem like there's any one moment where you can actually add up the total costs and the total benefits and say, there's your ROI. The fourth problem is that it's a crapshoot as far as I'm concerned. And for me, this is kind of the fatal flaw of the big ROI calculation that we want to get. And I'm going to explain this over a couple of slides. Going back to our very simple definition of ROI, let's say your department makes an investment and your return on your rate of return is 25%. So if you do the math, you realize, okay, we're going to break even on this investment in 4 years. And in the second example, you've already broken even. So that's great. The issue that I have with the simplicity of this is that analytics is one of those investments that does not have a constant rate of return over time. This assumes that it's 25%, but actually it may not be so. Around this time last year, I came across another interesting article. It was published by a group in Boston called Nucleus Research, and I have a link to it from a page on my blog. And encourage you to read it if you're interested in calculating ROI. But just to draw a couple of insights from that piece. One, they say the more an organization spends on analytics, the higher the return. And their second point is the longer an organization sticks with that investment, the higher the return. So each year, the return gets greater and greater. I'm not sure it's exponential, but this is a pretty little graph, which I stole from their report. But the key point here is that each year brings additional returns. It's not a steady rate of return. This tells me a couple of things. First of all, if you calculate ROI in the short run, if you make an investment and after year one you only make a 10% return, you think, wow, this is going to take 10 years to pay off. You've automatically made an error as far as I'm concerned. You're going to vastly underestimate the real value of an investment in analytics. And the other point is that, the bigger point for this is that in the long run, it's kind of impossible to say what the return is going to be, except it's probably going to be bigger than your first year return. This is not where the story ends, because I see all kinds of flaws as an underling in external relations, but probably the decision makers in the institution don't view ROI in quite the same way. So I think I need to reconsider my opposition to ROI. I just can't say, no, we're not going to actually try to calculate return on investment because I don't think we can. Well, that's not going to fly. Thinking about it again, yes, ROI may have, there's a lot of noise in the signal. But as long as it's a useful signal, then perhaps, I shouldn't give up on it just yet. So I gave more thought to how can ROI be redefined to take into account a big investment like analytics. So I turned to a performance management expert based in the UK. His name is Bernard Marr. He wrote this book, which is kind of my Bible for KPIs. It's not scintillating reading, but it's really good. It's a good resource. He says, and this is a good moment for me understanding ROI, he separates ROI into two categories, micro ROI and macro ROI. An example of micro ROI would be measuring the return from, let's say, a single direct mail campaign, something very specific. And the time frame for doing so would be no more than a year. An example of macro ROI would be what we've been talking about, one of these big investments in analytics. And typically we'd be talking about a period of several years. So the 4 problems that I mentioned about ROI, my little personal issues about ROI, really probably are more pertinent to the macro ROI side of things. On the micro side, it's not such an issue. We know what it costs to send out 25,000 pieces of mail. We know what the returns are from that. And there are also, the key part here, there are also ways to figure out what role did analytics play in improving our results from, say, the year previous. Now, I have a confession to make. I don't have a lot to say about measuring impact of analytics for a couple of reasons. I don't have time. As well, I'm concerned about creating demand at the leadership level for showing returns of analytics when I don't have that time in order to report on it in a timely way. But my point is that there are ways to measure the impact of analytics. And another resource I want to point you to is Rexer Analytics does an annual survey of data miners and data workers. And they share their specific tools that they use to measure the impact of analytics. And I'm definitely going to be checking that out because it's part of my to-do list. It's my thought that we can get to figuring out macro ROI, but we need to do it via micro ROI. Looking at each type of campaign or each type of initiative where analytics has played a role, figuring out the best way to calculate what the return is that can be attributed to the use of analytics, and sort of adding that up, and over time getting a better idea of what the return is. For some projects, we would get returns from cutting costs, for example, limiting the size of an annual fund mailing to the people who are most likely to respond. In other projects, we would get returns from identifying new sources of revenue, such as major gift prospects, who were not on the radar previously. So I guess it could be said I don't exactly practice what I'm preaching. At Dalhousie, I don't think we are as disciplined as we could be about measuring impact. But I see that changing. This is something I'd like us very much to get a handle on. We can look at this from a whole other angle. And I've invented, I'm going to play Bernard Marr. I've invented my own KPI. It's called CNI, the cost of not investing. And of course, it's ridiculous because you can't, this is not a quantity that you can actually calculate. But I think it's kind of useful to think about what are the potential risks involved in not making the investment in analytics. And again, I think this is all stuff that is not, you already know this, but it may be something that you can take to a decision maker and say, well, this is what the risk is of not putting this money in. I can think of 3 costs of not investing in analytics. First of all, I mentioned sunk costs earlier. The first risk would be the failure to maximize on our existing investment in such things as databases and data warehouses, all our resources in IT, including our own staff who may not be doing analytical work now, but are definitely trainable in that area. Second cost, my fear is that in the absence of analytics, we're more likely to make decisions based on intuition and gut and experience instead of actual data. Anytime that you can actually make some decisions that are better than random, and yes, there are some of our mail campaigns have been pretty much random if you're looking at acquisition. If you can do better than random over the long run, you're going to realize a return. And the third cost I see is that employees, not just people who are bent in the direction of analytics, employees will not get the chance to be proactive, to look at their own data and be entrepreneurial with the data. In an analytical organization, all employees have access to their own data, and they have the ability to manipulate it. They have the ability to ask more questions of the data, ask better questions of the data, and ultimately make better decisions. And this stuff may be sort of on the reporting side of the spectrum, but I think it fits in with an analytical investment for sure. So those are the costs I was able to think of, and you could probably think of others. And they're definitely more on the qualitative side as opposed to ROI, which is supposed to be quantitative. I want to turn now to how we. Are there any questions at this point? Okay. I want to turn now to how we find the resources to actually invest in analytics. At the start, I said that analytics is in addition to everything that we already do. So where are the resources going to come from? Where's the time? Do we hire more people, or are we going to have to say, tell some people, no, we can't do that? So I'm going to tell you more about what we at Dalhousie are doing, or where we hope to go. I don't have a prescription for everybody, but this what I have to say about Dalhousie might resonate with your situation. This little winter scene is taken a few feet from my office. The answer lies, for us in external relations, the answer lies in investing in business intelligence, oddly enough, investing in reporting. And I want to use as an example annual fund, which has a high demand for reporting. And this is where we used to be. It was a place of great pain and weeping and gnashing of teeth, just to get a basic performance report. And this would be produced monthly if we were lucky. Actually, if we were busy, when the report really needed to get done, it was most likely not to get done, just because it took so long to do. It was done in Excel and extremely manual. And the historical data, if it wasn't the current fiscal year, it was probably just canned data. So the data was getting more and more out of sync with the reality. So there was no such thing as a single version of the truth. Where we are now, and this is not our final destination, I hope, but where we are now is finally we've gotten the time it takes. We've made an investment in a new desktop BI tool. And for me to produce this report, I just refresh. We're still using a little bit of Excel, but I can refresh the raw data, throw the report, throw the tool on top of it, and it'll regenerate like a whole suite of reports in a very short period of time. Where we hope to get very soon is we're making an investment in a server-based reporting tool, and hoping to allow the end user, for example, annual giving, to pull this report on demand. And this is really going to change the game for us. It allows us, just in the reporting area, it's going to, well, I say us, I mean me. It's going to free up a lot of time for me to produce different cuts of the data that aren't those ugly tables of numbers and numbers. This is a dashboard which can be very quickly refreshed, which shows at this point in time how are we doing in comparison with the previous years. And you notice there's a lot of red there. We won't talk about that. As well, significantly, we're going to be able to put some analysis tools, simple but still useful, in the hands of staff themselves. So in annual giving, they're interested to see, well, this is cumulative. It's very difficult to see, I realize, but this is the cumulative cash in up to roughly today's date, and they can limit it according to, do they just want to see alumni giving as separate from everyone else's giving? That's a report that would have taken another day to produce earlier. Now they can just click on it and say, okay, limit it to alumni data. This is limited by solicitation type of mail, as opposed to phone and the horrible other. They can limit it by age of the donor and so on. So what that means is they don't have to come to us in advancement services and say, I'm doing this benchmarking thing and I need these numbers, and we tell them, well, that'll take at least 2 weeks. Then they get their data, it's the wrong data. It's like, it just goes back and forth. It's just too painful. So if they have this in their hands, hopefully it answers most of their, or a lot of their questions. So there's two big consequences of the shift. As I said before, more eyes on the data, better questions being asked, and better decisions being made. And the biggie is that advancement services, we have a lot more time to devote to more interesting stuff. So it frees up, basically our investment in BI is freeing up resources for analytics. Up to this point, I've been talking about investments for the institution or being made on behalf of the institution. But now I'd like to talk about you or people that you work with who could be trained in analytical work. And I chose this, this image of a periscope because it kind of gives me the image of looking up and out to see, where's your institution headed? Where is your sector headed? And with the point being, you want to be out in front of that. You don't want to be left behind in the waves because your skill set is not going to keep up. This is where we are today in external relations. We're doing kind of the same thing over and over and over again. We're doing it manually. We're threading the wrong bolt on the wrong nut or whatever. It's the BI assembly line. This is where we're headed. And notice what's missing. There's people. People are missing. This is actually a good thing. It doesn't, in our world, this doesn't lead to unemployment necessarily. The robots are serving up the standard reports, and the people are doing the analytics. They're doing the stuff that our creative brains were meant to do. That is, of course, if our people are out in front and taking the initiative to make investments in themselves, investing in their own skills, coming to conferences like this, using all the resources that are available to them to find the next thing that they should be doing. So I think you have two options. When I say you, I'm talking about, you might have in mind people who work in your shops who are maybe doing the rather unfulfilling work of just, pumping out these reports. And there's a number of strategies you can use to try to get closer to being where your institution is going. And I think it starts with picking a specific problem with data, which data might actually help you find a solution to. Something very specific, something that's causing people pain. And I think it's important not to try to corral a whole bunch of people together. In order to be agile, I think it's very important to if you have an idea, to try to work independently. Certainly communicate with your team, but not too big of a team. Oh, I got ahead of myself. You're not allowed to go yet. And I think if there's somebody between you and the data, if you're not pulling your own data, you should try to remove that layer because it just adds that little extra bit, well, not little, but quite a bit of friction. You want to be able to you want to be able to query the database yourself and so you have a question, you want to answer it right away. Number 4 is obvious. There are all kinds of resources out there. Number 5, remember that it's a process. It's iterative. Your first attempts are not going to impress. You need to build on your insights and fold them into the next iteration of whatever project it is you're working on. And also, every predictive model is a failure. So you have to learn where does it fail, where are the errors, what is it not accounting for, and find the answers that you can use to improve your next predictive model. So if I've done this correctly, I think I've left a fair bit of time, so either we'll have some questions that I can try to answer, or we can have some discussion, or we can go early. It's up to you. Yes?
You had in there, push it out. Is that how you started making the case after you started doing this? Did you just start giving this to people who didn't have any, they didn't ask for it, but you were like, hey, here's this thing that I want you to see? And how did that go over?
Okay, the first part of your question was...
You had in there something, blah, push it out.
Okay. Yeah, I think I've made some, the question for the sake of the video is, I mentioned pushing out, for example, the results of a predictive model, and, I'm sorry.
I was just wondering if that was something, okay, so in making the case for you to devote more time for this, did you start by just creating some predictive modeling and giving it to someone who hadn't asked?
Absolutely, yes. The question is, did I start just by creating predictive models and pushing it out there and see what the result was and use that to leverage more time to do similar work? Yes, I did that, and that was a very kind of a slow, arduous process because people aren't necessarily going to get it. And I got much better over time at not explaining how the modeling process actually works. It's like, don't take them to the sausage factory. It's just, tell them what the results are of the model are. What is it going to do for them? It's like, this model will help you or save money on mailing to people who, you know what, and it actually, in my first few models that I built, they didn't actually get deployed at all. They weren't used. So what I did was, that's not a defeat. It just means they aren't there yet. So I would take those score results, wait for a year to go by, see what the results were, do up a lift chart or a table or something that would show, okay, here's the people I identified as high scorers and most likely to do whatever. And oh, look at that, those were them. And all these other people who scored low, why did you bother with them? Because you spent $10,000 or whatever it is. So it's a, yep. Yeah.
The tool you use for the heat map of California, could you tell us what platform you built that on?
That's Tableau. I use Tableau Desktop to do, well, that's what I'm using now, and we hope to employ the server version soon. The geocoding for the addresses was done manually, and so that was, I mean, I didn't look up each one, no. you upload them in batches of 1,000 to Google, and you get your latitude and longitude back, and Tableau can interpret that and throw it on a map. We have recently hired a programmer in external relations, and I'm really hoping that she can help us interface with the Google API and automate some of that. Any more questions? That's great. Thank you very much.